Hi everyone, it's Jody and welcome to my channel, The Planner Pages Edit. Today I'm going to talk about the practice of keeping a commonplace book. I'm going to walk you all through what a commonplace book is because I think you might be surprised on what the proper definition is and how it is intended to be used. I'll also talk about why you might want to keep your own commonplace book, as well as some tips on setting one up. And we'll just take a little tour of my commonplace book so you can kind of see how I'm using this system to keep track of a lot of the information that I consume. So get comfortable, sit back, maybe grab a drink and a snack, and we'll get started. So first, let's start with what a commonplace book is not. As of late, I have noticed that the term commonplace book has been sort of used as a marketing term. And what I mean by that is there are brands out there who will market their items as commonplace books, but they aren't really promoting their products to be used the way that commonplace books are meant to be used. And that's okay. I totally get it. But I thought it would be interesting to show you all what a commonplace book really is, how it was intended to be used, and how you can probably implement this ancient practice into your needs today. Because believe it or not, this is a very old practice of keeping a commonplace book, but there are a lot of modern day writers in particular, and probably content creators, who are using the commonplace book system as it was intended to be used for their work in this current day and age. So let's begin, first of all, by going through what a commonplace book is not. All right, so what a commonplace book is not. It's not a journal or a junk journal. It's not a notebook, at least not in the sense that you and I understand the concept of a notebook. It's not even a catch-all notebook where there are no rules for how to use this, because there are some rules. It is not a sketchbook, although it can contain sketches. It's not a scrapbook or memory book, although it is used to help you keep things together that you don't want to forget. And it's not a planner. The formal definition of a commonplace book is it's a book that is a central organized notebook where you collect and store ideas, quotes, facts, information that you consume in your daily life with the intention of returning to it later for future reference. So it really is to function as a repository of information, which you're going to return to for learning or creativity uses. And we'll go into this a little bit later. I know that's a lot of words for a definition of a commonplace book, but it's going to all make sense by the end of this video. So I thought it would be really interesting to learn about some people who kept commonplace books. This is a practice that goes way back to antiquity. So one of the earliest keepers of a commonplace book is the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. And in fact, a lot of his publications, including his famous book, Meditations, comes from excerpts of his commonplace book. And you can go into the history of Meditations. It's very fascinating. It was never meant to be published or shared. It was really his own private thoughts. But as people discovered them, they learned that there were a lot of lessons in there for everyone. And so it kind of became what it is today as a published book. We all know Leonardo da Vinci, but we probably don't know that he also kept a commonplace book. And you can actually visit a handful of museums around the world. I don't know the exact places right now. I'll have to look them up, where you can actually see pages of his commonplace book. They're on display for the public to see, which is really fascinating, I would think, to be able to see that. Moving into modern times, there are a lot of authors and a handful of content creators who use commonplace books as well. Miranda Mills, I just want to do a little shout out for her. I discovered Miranda a few years ago on Instagram. She is a British author and content creator, and I have really enjoyed watching her online content evolve from a podcast to a newsletter. And her newsletter, by the way, included pages from her actual Commonplace book, which she shared with subscribers. And it's really through her that I learned about this practice. But she also has evolved into a YouTube content creator and now an actual published author. In fact, just this month, she published her Commonplace book. It is appropriately called the Country Commonplace Book. But really, it's been fun to kind of see that journey and see her Commonplace book actually be published and reaching a wider audience. Perhaps completely opposite to Miranda in terms of style and presentation is American author and lecturer Ryan Holiday. Most people know Holiday for his expertise in the study of Stoicism, which is something I've really gotten into these days. But he is also a big proponent on the practice of keeping a commonplace book and really likes to advocate its use for authors and writers such as him. And he actually has a series of YouTube videos going through ways to keep a commonplace book, and he will show you his system, which is a little unconventional, but it's fun to see. So while this is an ancient practice, it is still alive and well today. Some examples of why you might want to keep a commonplace book. If you are a teacher or professor, this could be a handy system for collecting information that you can use later in some lectures. Same with research. Or if you're writing a book, like both Mills and Holiday have credited this system in helping them write their books. You can also use it for newsletter content. If you host a podcast, you might want to keep a commonplace book to collect information you are hearing in your day-to-day for later use in an episode. You can use it as someone who writes articles. If you keep a blog, it's really just meant to be used as a reference book. So as I said before, there is a right and wrong way of defining what a commonplace book is. And there is a right and wrong way of how you use one, but there are no hard set rules on how to keep one. So I'm a traditionalist. I use a blank notebook for mine. But Ryan Holiday, who I had mentioned earlier, you should actually look up his videos on commonplace books because he will show you his system, and it's pretty impressive. He uses index cards, but he actually has entire tubs full of categorized index cards, which he uses to write his books. And that still qualifies as a commonplace book because that's how he's using it. He's using that system to collect information that he returns to for later use. So he may not be using a notebook like I am, but he is still using a system that qualifies as a commonplace book. Now, if you are more of a digital person, there are apps and programs out there that you can use that would also qualify as keeping a commonplace book. But today, I'm just going to focus on my approach using a good old-fashioned notebook. So assuming that you are also going to use a blank notebook for your commonplace book, I'm just going to walk you through how you go about setting one up, or at least one way to consider as you set one up. So this is my commonplace book. It is blank, unlined pages. I actually got it from Cloth and Paper, and it was marketed under the term a commonplace notebook set. I believe they are still selling it on their website. But when they sold it, they did not market it as a notebook that is to be used as a traditional commonplace notebook. They marketed it as something you can use for your creativity however you want. And that's cool because there's a lot of uses you can get out of a blank notebook. But I decided I'm going to be a traditional purist and I'm going to literally use this as my commonplace book. And it's been pretty fun. It's worked well so far. So if you're going to create a commonplace book out of a blank notebook, I would recommend doing it this way. Though do whatever works for you. So I would first set aside a few pages for your table of contents. I really only needed one page because I already kind of knew everything I was going to keep in here. But you don't need to fill this out. Just set aside some pages for table of content section. Then I would go through the rest of the pages and number them. And I've numbered them in the corner of each page. Number them till the end. So I think my page came out to be 197 pages front and back. Now, after you've numbered all your pages, you can either stop right here and just kind of let things percolate. Or if you already know how you want to use your Commonplace book, you can kind of go on to this next phase, which is sectioning out your blank pages so that each category you want to keep has an equal amount of pages. So what do I mean by category? So a proper Commonplace book is going to track information from various categories. So, for example, I'll just use my table of contents. Just ignore this. These are just notes that I put together for myself as I set this up. My categories for this notebook are nonprofit fundraising, which is my full-time daytime job, Bible study notes. I will say these are not actual Bible study notes. These are specific observations or notes that I have captured from my traditional Bible study that I want to return to later. The other section is Stoicism, which is something that I've been studying. A personal growth section. So I'll read a lot of personal growth, professional growth books, self-help books, and I will capture that information and transfer it to this notebook, especially the parts that I really want to return to later. And then a section called How to Live. And I really don't even know how to define to an external audience what this section is. I can give you an example. So I guess the examples I have here are really from some fiction books that I've been reading. So like I read this year's the Shogun series, part 1 and 2, and part 2 had some meaningful passages that I kind of felt captured this category of how to live. So like an example, one of the characters said, "Have you noticed the different sounds of rain?" Which kind of made me think, oh, rain can have more than one sound. Sure. Slow down, listen to nature. That's how I want to live. So, that's just an example of what goes in here. It may not make sense to you, but it makes perfect sense to me. So anyways, I took each category and sectioned off so that each of them have roughly the same amount of pages. And I think for me, that came out to be maybe about 39, 40 pages per section, give or take. So then once you have done that, once you know your categories and you've sectioned them out, then you can go in and fill out your table of contents. At least that's what I did. And for me, it only took up half a page. So you have your table of contents, you have your page numbers, you have your categories identified and sectioned out. Now what? Now you consume media. You read, you take notes, you listen to podcasts, you take notes, you attend lectures, you take notes, you watch a movie, you take notes, right? You just consume information. You take note of the pieces of information you want to return to later, and you can keep track of that in a separate notebook or just by annotating and bookmarking. And then you would transfer that information at a later time to your Commonplace notebook. So for example, if you're reading a book, I would recommend approaching it by annotating and taking notes in a separate notebook or on index cards. And I do not recommend filling in your Commonplace book in real time as you go through that book. In fact, before you even open up your Commonplace book, I recommend you actually finish the article or the book that you are reading. Or if it's a podcast, finish listening to that before you put anything into your Commonplace book. And then just let it sit with you. Ryan Holiday recommends letting things sit with you for at least a month before transferring notes into your Commonplace book. Obviously, that's a personal decision, but I think the point was you're really meant to digest the information and be selective about what you put here in your Commonplace notebook. The goal is to use and collect information that you are going to use later on, not just any information. It's very intentional what you put in here. So during that time of just digesting what you have consumed, that's where you kind of make decisions on what really goes in here and what doesn't need to be in here. So I'll show you an example of how I have used this for a book that I've read. I actually earlier this year read Mel Robbins' book, The Let Them Theory, and transferred bits and pieces of this into my Commonplace notebook after I finished reading this. But as you can see, this is the book. I kind of annotated the hell out of this, right? You can see a lot of page flags. You can see a lot of highlights. The highlight's in gray, so you might not see it very well. But I took a lot of notes. However, maybe you can see here all the pages I flagged. However, only a few of these made it into my Commonplace notebook. And let me just kind of find where I stored those. So I stored them under, my personal growth section. Oops, that's a different book. All right. So I stored the notes from this book into my personal notes category. And you can see I don't have a ton of notes in here, right? Just a handful. I took a ton of notes and annotated a ton of pages, but only a few select pieces made it into my Commonplace notebook, pieces that I intend to return to later on. And as you can see, compared to my planners, this is very minimalist. So you can totally, decorate your Commonplace book however you want. I have some diagrams in here, but really, what I took from here, only a little bit made it into this book. And I took about a month to really digest it before I transferred notes into my Commonplace notebook. So how am I using this for information that I'm getting from other resources besides books? Well, my professional development section, nonprofit fundraising, which is what I do full-time when I'm not online. This is the information here is mostly taken from articles, right? So I haven't really took anything from a book in here, but I have taken a lot of things from articles and podcasts and transferred that into this section. And these are things that I'm going to come back to as part of my career. So ideas that I want to implement later on at work, some facts and figures that I want to remember and keep track of. That is how I'm using this from the standpoint of not actually reading a book, but in this case, podcasts and articles. So as you can see, there are still a lot of blank pages in my Commonplace book, and that's okay. In fact, that is exactly how this is supposed to be used. It's supposed to be treated as a living and breathing notebook, and it can take years to fill up a Commonplace book, and that's completely fine. In fact, that's how it's supposed to be used. It's just basically a collection of facts and thoughts you have captured throughout the years as a consumer of media and as someone who wants to return to some of these ideas later on, whether it's for professional or creative work. But that's it. It doesn't have to be a complicated system. It definitely needs to be functional, though. In a nutshell, that is what a Commonplace book is, how to set one up, why you might want to use one, and what it can look like. I mean, it can look like anything you want. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a book. There are other ways to keep a commonplace book. But this is how I'm doing it. And it's been a wonderful process for me, both functionally and just in terms of organizing my thoughts. And I can see how this practice has survived the ages. So before I close out this episode, I want to share with you all a quote from American lecturer Robert Pyle. And I think this quote neatly sums up the practice of keeping a commonplace book. He says about taking notes, be selective, don't be compulsive, and enjoy your note taking. Until next time, my friends, thank you for joining in this episode of the Planner Pages Edit. And let me know in the comments how you are using your commonplace notebook, or if you have any questions, I will try and answer those as well. Until next time, see you later, guys, and goodbye.